Hi, my name is Nadia. Sunday brunch at Harbor and Hearth has its own rhythm, a kind of carefully contained chaos. The cafe is small, pressed against the curve of the seawall, and whenever I walk in, I smell salt. First brine carried on the wind through windows that never quite close. Then I hear the clatter cutlery ringing against porcelain chairs, scraping against wood planks, and laughter that spills too easily. Mismatched mugs line the shelves as though the place was curated from the leftovers of other kitchens. Every detail is imperfect, but somehow the whole room feels deliberate. I sat at the far end of our table watching steam rise from my mug. That steam mattered to me. It was composure I could hold in my hands, a reminder to breathe slow to stay warm inside the noise. Beneath the table, tucked deep in my coat pocket, was my teal scarf. Once I wore it openly, but it had drawn too many jokes. Too bright, someone said. Too dramatic, another laughed. So I kept it hidden, folded carefully, as if by silencing that fabric, I could avoid being silenced myself. My family's voices rushed around me, spilling across one another until no single sentence held weight. That's how it always feels. Everyone eager to be louder than the rest, while I live in the quiet spaces between their noise. People think quiet means small, like I take up less space because I use fewer words. They never notice how much precision lives inside silence. The door opened with a gust of wind and the clatter of heels. Iris, my sister, always late enough to turn heads and always loud enough to keep them. She strode in with that performative air. She has a mix of confidence and entitlement. The whole table brightened as though she carried the sun with her. She kissed the air near our mother's cheek, set her bag down with a thud, and barely glanced at me before striking. Stop hiding behind other people's names, Nadia. Her voice sliced through the chatter. The words didn't just land, they echoed. Forks hovered mid-air, conversations stuttered, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint hiss of steam rising from my cup. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat press against my skin until it hurt. Iris smiled sweetly, basking in her performance, and then turned her attention to waving down a server, as if the sharpness she delivered had been casual, unworthy of pause. But inside me, something anchored itself. A vow. I am not hiding. I am a name. I built the scaffold others climb. The clamor returned to the table. Someone laughed too loudly at a story half finished. A spoon clinked against a glass, a child toppled a cup of orange juice and was shushed with hurried napkins. My phone buzzed on the wood beside my plate. I looked down. Across the cracked screen glowed a single notification: new residency applicant Iris Farrow. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because I was surprised, but because of the symmetry. Iris, mocking me for invisibility, had stepped straight into the world I had carved brick by brick. The application she bragged about last week, the one she thought would finally prove her worth, was already in my hands. She had no idea her future balanced on the desk she dismissed as irrelevant, the one I built in silence. I traced the rim of my mug with my thumb and let the steam curl into my face. Quiet isn't small. Quiet is precise. That phrase repeated in my head like a single piano note echoing in an empty room. I imagined strings swelling softly underneath it, carrying the truth outward. No one else noticed. My mother leaned closer to Iris, encouraging her to list the companies she thought were fighting over her. My uncle interrupted with a joke too loud for its punchline. The family clung to Iris's noise the way sailors cling to a lighthouse, never realizing the harbor itself was held steady by something quieter, something unseen. I thought of the nights when I bent over grant proposals until my hands cramped, the mornings when I rose before dawn to edit drafts no one believed in, but me. I remembered the first fellowship rejection, and the way I swallowed the sting, adjusted, and tried again. Iris wasn't wrong that I worked with names bigger than mine. She just didn't understand that I built the scaffolding that allowed those names to rise higher. My fingerprints are hidden in the beams. My work is the reason those walls stand. The scarf pressed against my side like a heartbeat. I didn't pull it out, not yet. Instead, I sat in stillness, holding the knowledge like a stone in my palm. Iris's path now ran straight through me. She would never see it coming. Salt air drifted through the cracked window. It carried the smell of tides, shifting of cycles that cannot be stopped. I lifted my mug, breathed in its steam, and let my silence steady me again. If you want to hear stories like this every day, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss the next chapter. I grew up in a house that always smelled faintly of varnish. The wood in the door frames, the stair banister. Even the picture frames along the hallway exhaled that scent like a ghost of the past. It clung to my clothes, to my hair, and sometimes I wondered if it seeped into me, too polished on the outside but grain beneath. Memory comes to me now, like film reels dug out of an attic trunk, blurred edges, scratch marks, tones softened like old newsprint. In nearly every reel, Iris is in the spotlight, while I linger at the margin holding tools no one remembers. That was the pattern. Iris was the trophy. I was the toolkit. She stood on gymnasium stages with medals glinting against her chest. I crouched under the dining table, tightening a loose bolt so the family could clap on stable ground. She played piano solos, bowing to cheers. I twisted wires backstage so the sound system wouldn't cut out. Iris lived for applause, and I learned to keep the applause machine working. Nobody notices the hands that keep the lights from flickering, but without them, the whole stage goes dark. Our stairwell displayed what my mother called the wall of frames. Photographs in neat rows, a curated truth for guests to admire. But those frames edited me out. In Iris's graduation picture, I am cropped at the shoulder. In her birthday photos, my hand lighting the candles is cut away by the frame. It was subtle at first, but over time the pattern hardened Iris front and center me at the edge, a supporting shadow. Glass preserves, but it also erases. One night while Iris slept with trophies lined on her shelf, I hunched over a computer screen glowing in the dark. An open-source civic app had broken a tool the local library relied on. I traced the bug through endless lines of code fingers, sore eyes burning. By dawn, I had fixed it. The release note appeared days later, patched by team. Not Nadia, not even initials, just team. My work disappeared into a faceless hole. It was a victory I couldn't claim out loud. That was the day I pinned a tide chart above my desk. A technical sheet, nothing decorative, but it became my private scripture. High tide, low tide, inevitable, steady beyond the noise of applause. When I stared at it, I could believe my time would come the way the sea always returns to shore. Iris could glow under cameras. I would follow a rhythm older than any spotlight. I think back now and hear those years scored by a low piano. Ostinato, repetitive steady, not meant to dazzle but to endure. That music taught me restraint. Restraint was never weakness. It was structure. It kept me from breaking when the applause didn't come. It reminded me to breathe when the wall of frames tried to crop me smaller. Iris never noticed. She never saw me bent over the broken things, never knew how often my quiet hands steadied her stage. To her, life was a forecast of eternal sunshine. But I had been keeping my own weather report. And clouds had already begun to gather. If you've ever done work that went uncredited, you know how it feels, the silence heavier than noise. If you haven't, count yourself among the fortunate. My apartment hums differently than the house I grew up in. No varnish here. No crowded stairwell of frames. No constant chorus of voices trying to outshout each other. Instead, there is the low electric whisper of the router tucked in the corner, a constant pulse of quiet life. Outside, gulls sweep low over the harbor, their cries jagged against the otherwise still afternoon. My desk is angled toward the window, but I rarely look out. The view isn't the sea itself, just rooftops and antennae, but the air carries salt. I like to think that's enough proof the tides are still moving, even if I can't see them. The heart of this place is my rig, humming softly, glowing like a lighthouse in miniature. Its screen is the only bright thing in the room. Around it, sticky notes bloom across the wall. From a distance, they look like clutter, but I know the order. Constellations of thought, each color meaning something: yellow for deadlines, blue for research, pink for questions I haven't solved yet. Sometimes I stare at them until my eyes blur and the notes really do look like stars, a private sky charted for no one else. I fold my scarf neatly across the back of the chair and breathe once. The login prompt waits, cursor blinking like a metronome. My fingers move without hesitation. Username NF08. Not Nadia, never Nadia. The alias is my armor, the shell that lets me move without the baggage of being the overlooked one. Behind it, no one asked me to speak louder. No one crops me out of the frame. Behind it, I am precise. Whole. The Harbor Light Fund console opens with its familiar dashboard grant cycles reports pending applicants. I scroll the hum of the machine steady beneath my fingertips. Then the name appears. Applicant Iris Farrow. My pulse catches. The room feels smaller. I hear her voice again from brunch, sharp as porcelain breaking. Stop hiding behind other people's names. Nadia. And yet here is her name offered up to me in a digital box waiting for judgment. I click it open. Her portfolio spills across the screen. Sleek formatting, expensive headshots, captions polished to perfection. Iris has always known how to make gloss look like substance. She's good at shine, but I read deeper. Metrics are thin, stretched vague, numbers padded. Community impact that evaporates when pressed for detail. I scroll further, eyes narrowing. It's all familiar. Iris has always been able to sell the story better than she lived it. My hand hovers over the keys. One decision here could end it. Reject. With one tap, her file could vanish into the archive stamped with a sterile reason code. No interviews, no second chances. It would be clean, invisible final. Part of me wonders if she would even suspect me. Probably not. To Iris, the world has always been a stage where she performs, not a scaffold held up by others. But I don't press it. That's not what I built this for. The fund is more than a ledger of names. It's proof that cycles can turn, that truth has its own rhythm. My silence has never been about revenge. It has always been about precision, about letting the tides speak louder than shouts. I click advance to interviews. The button glows, cursor blinking like a heartbeat before confirmation. I press enter. The decision logs ordinary as a weather note action complete. I sit back, exhaling. No drama, no applause. Just a shift subtle but undeniable, like the tide pulling out a little farther than yesterday. Iris thinks in terms of trophies and spotlight. I think in terms of weather reports, the gathering of clouds, the long patience of pressure building. On my wall, the tide chart waits, edges curled and yellowed from tape. For years, it was my promise that cycles return. Now it feels more like a roadmap, a reminder that timing matters more than noise. The gulls cry again outside, sharp and hungry. The router hums steady as ever. My tea has gone cold. None of it matters. What matters is the file has moved forward not because Iris deserves my mercy, but because truth doesn't need to be shouted to be real. It can be shown quietly, deliberately, in the choices we make when no one is watching. That is my agency. Not spectacle, not revenge. Action. Is truth better shown than told? The building where the Harbor Light Fund holds its meetings always smells faintly of citrus cleaner, as if the staff are trying too hard to prove the place is sterile, transparent, trustworthy. The corridors hum with fluorescent light buzzing like bees trapped behind plastic covers. I walk them quietly, badge-clipped scarf folded away in my bag. My footsteps echo against glass walls, and everywhere I turn, reflection stares back at me. But glass is tricky. It shows you shapes, outlines, gestures. It rarely shows you weight or intention. That's Mason's world. He is the public face, the one who speaks in front of cameras, who makes policy sound inspiring, who knows how to take a dense report and turn it into something a senator might quote. Mason is fluent in glass. He understands what to show, what to reflect, how to bend the light so people see what they need to. We met in the corridor outside the boardroom, both of us holding our notes, both pretending we weren't exhausted. Mason leaned closer, his voice pitched for me alone. They're asking again about the architects, whether anonymity is hiding weakness. I kept my face still, but inside I flinched. The architects were us, the anonymous team behind the models, the algorithms, the scaffolding of the fund's work. Mason smiled thinly. Don't worry, I'll defend the firewall. We had built it together, his voice in public, my spine in private. The firewall wasn't just secrecy, it was protection. Without it, people like Iris would drag the work into spectacle, into noise. Behind the wall, I could think refined test, unseen, unmocked. When we stepped into the boardroom, Amma was already at the table, flipping through a binder. She was new, sharp-eyed, unwilling to let Mason's charm wash over her. Anonymity. She said, not looking up, is it power or is it avoidance? Her words cut clean, and for a second the room stilled. Mason smiled, smooth as ever. It's neither. It's stewardship. We protect the architects so they can protect the work. Names don't build resilience. Structures do. His gaze flickered toward me, quick and visible to the others. Amma raised an eyebrow, unconvinced but curious. She closed the binder with a soft thud and let it rest. The question lingered, though. In my chest it hummed. Was I shielding myself or was I caging myself? I told myself silence was precision, but sometimes it felt like a lock. The meeting began in earnest. Presentations clicked across glass screens, charts rising and falling like stock tickers. One cohort's report spiraled downward, numbers collapsing in real time. Nervous glances darted across the table. Someone coughed, papers shuffled, the air thickened with the smell of failure. I opened my laptop quietly, fingers flying across keys. My Model 1 I had tested at 2 a.m. against endless data flagged a hidden pattern. A flaw in the inputs, not the outputs. I adjusted the parameters, reran the sequence, and within minutes the chart on the screen righted itself. Numbers stabilized, curves lifted, the line bent toward survival again. No one clapped. No one said my name. Mason cleared his throat, explained away the anomaly with polished confidence, and the board nodded, relieved. Glass walls reflected calm again, as if the panic had never existed. I sat back, hands steady in my lap. The cello in my head began its low undercurrent, deep and resonant, a reminder of stakes that never vanish. Then the piano returned, soft but firm, marking each decision like a note on the tide chart pinned to my wall at home. The music belonged to me alone, unheard by anyone else in the room. That is the balance we live in. Mason's face, my spine. Glass for them, silence for me. The firewall holds, but Amma's question lingers sharp as citrus. Is anonymity a shield or a cage? The first time Iris entered the Harbor Light Fund system, she didn't know it was mine she was walking into. She thought it was just another gate, another stage for her to perform on. I wasn't in the room that day, the firewall made sure of it. But through the transcripts, the recordings, the data, I was everywhere. Watching, listening, weighing. The interview took place in a glass-walled room at the center of the building. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the HVAC pushed cool air in steady sighs. The panel sat across the table, pens tapping against notepads, projector fan, whirring as slides loaded. Every sound was amplified by the stillness, small noises turning sharp like percussion against silence. Iris walked in with her usual brightness, a little too bright for that sterile space. She had chosen a blazer the color of polished pearl, and when she smiled, it was the same one I remembered from every family dinner where she'd told a story louder than mine. She carried herself like a headline, confident the room was already convinced. The questions began simply: outline your project detail, your impact metrics, explain the model you'd propose for scaling. Iris answered with flourish. She was fluent in gloss. Words spilled out, smooth, polished, rehearsed. But the numbers, they wobbled. Growth percentages that didn't quite align, impact claims that leaned heavily on adjectives rather than data. The panel nodded politely, though I noticed in the transcript later the slight pauses in the margins, the ellipses typed by a recorder who sensed hesitation. Then Amma asked her question. Just one, clear and cutting. What system failure do you most fear? And how would you detect it before it spread? The silence stretched for a beat too long. Iris smiled, tilted her head, and started to answer. She spoke about vigilance, about being proactive, about the importance of resilience. She used all the right words. Words you'd expect in a press release, but the answer was air. She didn't name a real failure mode, didn't outline detection steps. She bluffed. In the transcript, I could almost hear the staccato piano notes striking one after another, marking the tension she tried to paper over. Her bluff was a chord out of tune, obvious to anyone who knew the music. Amma wrote something in the margin of her notes, but the redacted copy I received left the name blacked out, the words anonymous. Later that night, I sat at my desk, tea cooling again, scarf still folded and hidden on the chair. I opened the transcript. Page after page of Iris's voice, familiar yet distant, cut down to text, stripped of tone. I read slowly, highlighting phrases, inserting data marginalia under the alias NF08. My comments were precise surgical, metrics thin, impact vague, bluff detected insufficient mitigation detail. No one knew it was me. To the system, I was initials and numbers, not a sister with bruised history. My notes joined others in the review, indistinguishable in tone, merged into the collective weight of judgment, anonymous yet sharp enough to bend outcomes. As I closed the file, the apartment hummed around me, the router, the faint buzz of the HVAC through the building's ductwork, the projector fan still in my memory. Iris had wanted to perform her way through, but systems don't reward gloss forever. They require structure. They demand truth. I leaned back. Let the sound of staccato piano settle in my head. Each note a reminder that tension isn't always a flaw. Sometimes it's the music of precision cutting through noise. She didn't know it yet, but her path had narrowed. Not because I had spoken her name, but because I hadn't. Have you ever bluffed and regretted it? Rain had been falling since before sunrise, fine threads stitching the sky into a single gray sheet. By afternoon, the glass walls of the fund's main building were streaked with rivulets, each drop leaving its trace sliding downward, blurring the view of the harbor into something softer and harder to read. Inside, the air carried the faint chill of wet coats shaken off in the lobby, mingling with the constant citrus tang of the cleaner the staff used on the concrete floors. I walked the main corridor slowly, my shoes tapping out a hollow rhythm against the polished slab. The glass stretched on both sides, reflecting my outline again and again, multiplied like echoes. These halls weren't just passageways, they were instruments. A glass corridor records more than footsteps. It catches posture hesitation, the way people angle their shoulders when someone else is speaking too loudly. A seismograph of culture built into the architecture itself. My phone buzzed with Slack notifications, the vibration pulsing against my palm like a heartbeat. I glanced down. Iris. Again. She had posted in the Fellows channel, and the words glowed with the certainty of someone who believed herself already historic. We are here to be change agents, not caretakers of the old guard. Let's disrupt what doesn't serve and make our mark. The phrasing was familiar, the kind of chest-out rhetoric that sounds powerful in a keynote but hollow in daily practice. And yet, I could already see the ripples spreading. Passing an open workroom, I caught two fellows straightening in their chairs, backs suddenly stiffer their posture, louder than their silence. They weren't just reading Iris's words, they were adjusting themselves to her imagined gaze. That's how noise works. It doesn't just fill a space, it shifts the weight of it. Farther along, I spotted Eli through another pane of glass. Eli never missed details, never let anything slip by. He was already typing into the system, logging a note minor process breach, cross-check skipped. He didn't need to write the name. The timing said enough. Iris had brushed off one of the fund's oldest protocols, calling it legacy paperwork in front of the others, her voice carrying as if to prove she was above it. A tiny rebellion. Small enough to look harmless, but culture bends most under the weight of small deflections repeated over time. I didn't rush into correction. That wasn't my way. Mason could handle speeches and reprimands if it came to that. My job was quieter. I opened the back end from my phone, slipping into the framework I knew better than my own reflection. A few flags set here, a review filter adjusted there. Nothing dramatic. Trails, not traps. If the breach became a pattern, the system would show it. If it was just bravado, the trail would fade. My role wasn't to cage her, it was to leave the evidence visible when the tide pulled back. The corridor's glass reflected me again, but this time the rain outside distorted the image streaks of water, cutting through my outline until it looked like I was dissolving. I pressed the elevator button. The ding was sharp metallic, echoing down the hall louder than it should have. I thought about the building's acoustics, the way small sounds amplified the way even a pen tap could feel like a hammer. In the background, the rhythm in my mind began a ticking hi-hat, crisp and relentless, joined by the steady thump of a bass line. Music of systems of pressure measured in beats. When the doors slid open, I stepped into the elevator alone. For a moment, I stood with the rain-dimmed corridor behind me, watching the faint outlines of fellows still shifting, still echoing Iris's stance. That was the thing about glass, it didn't lie. But it didn't explain either. It showed only the surface. Understanding required interpretation. Iris thought she was leading a movement. She believed slogans could substitute for structure. But I had walked these halls long enough to know the truth. Culture doesn't fracture because of one loud message. It fractures when practice bends to match the noise, when repetition cements defiance into habit. The cracks don't show at first, but the glass corridor feels them, every vibration, every tremor, every bluff turned ritual. The doors closed, sealing me in with the sound of rain tapping the panes outside. I breathed once steady and let the rhythm in my chest align with the bass line in my head. This was the work. To notice, to record, to flag. To keep the seismograph steady until the quake reveals itself. Does culture break from noise or from practice? The rain didn't stop for days. It became part of the building, part of me, constant percussion against glass, softer than storm, but harder than silence. I boiled water for tea, listening to the kettle's click when it shut off the sound, small but final. That was how most of my days felt, a series of small final clicks. Decisions no one saw. The fund was full of moments too fragile for spectacle. A fellow uploaded a dataset with an error buried deep inside one that might have unraveled weeks of work if it spread. I corrected it quietly. No comment. No note, just a clean version waiting for them the next morning. Another fellow drafted a proposal but left the resource section blank, overwhelmed by where to begin. I slipped a link into their folder under the alias and unseen map. And when a nervous researcher's voice cracked during a recorded presentation, I logged in later and left a comment under her chart, methodology solid, data integrity strong. She'd never know it was me, but I watched the way her shoulders straightened the next day. These weren't grand gestures. They were ledger entries, small braveries written in invisible ink. I started keeping track of them in a plain notebook, nothing fancy, just lined paper. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to remind myself that even quiet choices deserve to be remembered. Each entry a balance against the noise. One afternoon, as rain pooled on the windowsill, I overheard something that surprised me. Iris on the phone, not in performance mode, not chest out and loud, but thin-voiced. She was calling her landlord about a leak in her apartment ceiling. I couldn't hear every word, just enough water dripping, already spreading. "Can you please come today?" Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with strain. For once, she didn't sound like the stage version of herself. She sounded human, and it pulled me up short. Later that evening, as I sifted through applicant files, I saw her name again. Iris Farrow. Another progress report, this one rushed rough around the edges. Instead of annotating it with critique, I opened a folder and dropped in a neutral process document, guidelines on error logging and resource tracking. Nothing personal, nothing indulgent. Just a tool the same as I'd send to anyone else. I sent it under the alias NF08. I don't know if she'll use it. Maybe she'll skim it and forget. Maybe she'll follow it line by line and believe it came from some faceless mentor. Either way, it was an act of balance. Not forgiveness, not favoritism, just alignment with the ledger I'd begun. Help where it is needed, not where it is deserved. On my desk, the teal scarf had slipped from my bag, one corner peeking out like it wanted air. I left it there, visible but quiet. A symbol of what I once hid, now resting closer to sight. I ran my hand over the cover of the notebook where I'd started my private ledger. The paper felt rough beneath my fingers, pages waiting for ink. The rain tapped a rhythm against the window, softer now, almost melodic. In my mind, warmer strings began to play, layered with breathy pads, music that held space instead of filling it. For the first time in a while, the sound wasn't about vigilance. It was about breath. Small braveries. That was enough for today. Have you ever helped someone who hurt you? The rain had thinned to a silver mist, but the harbor stayed wrapped in fog so dense the ferries groaned their horns every hour. Those low, patient notes slid through the fund's glass walls, reminders that even when you couldn't see the water, the tide was still moving. Inside, the air was steady, climate-controlled humming with fluorescent light. My keyboard tapped its cadence against the silence, each keystroke small but final. Down the hall, the printer spun gears, whirring as it spat out page after page. The building itself sounded like a machine deciding. At 9:17, the portal pinged. New upload, Iris Farrow. The file name had its own swagger, disruption as renewal. I opened it cautiously, bracing the way you brace, before lifting a box that looks light, but isn't. On the first pass, it glittered. Every paragraph pulsed with verbs like ignite, transform, reimagine. The formatting gleamed photos staged to catch light. If language alone could bend outcomes, Iris's file would have broken the boardroom in half. But beneath the shine, the scaffolding was hollow. Metrics skimmed the surface instead of digging deep. Assumptions stacked without evidence. Projections leaned on hope instead of math. It was architecture sketched in neon bright lines, no beams. By noon, Amma had returned it. Her margin notes were stripped of ornament show work. Detail assumptions. Trace sources. No velvet, no apology. Amma didn't reward gloss. She rewarded bones. I imagined Iris reading those notes, her smile faltering as the foghorn outside echoed her silence. Amma hadn't rejected her. She'd done worse in Iris's language. She had asked for receipts. I didn't step in with a shield. Not a word of comfort, not a hidden patch. Instead, I went to the place where my influence mattered most, the system itself. In the admin console, I opened the framework of the application portal and began grafting something new. A verification grid? Impartial. Unforgiving. Every claim would now demand its artifact. Every metric a raw table with timestamp. Every projection tested against both baseline and stretch scenarios. The portal wouldn't allow an applicant to advance until the bones of their argument had weight. No vague industry leading. No impact without data logs. The grid didn't care if you were eloquent, charming, or famous. It cared if you could prove it. The cursor blinked as I saved each new rule patient as a heartbeat. Down the hall, the printer whirred again, ejecting review packets warm to the touch. I stacked them square on the desk, listening for the soft hush of paper aligning. Outside, another foghorn bellowed, long, unhurried, certain. That was what fairness sounded like to me. Not applause, not anger, just inevitability. Hours later, Iris tried again. The file returned, still dressed in sheen, still speaking in bold strokes. The grid met it with blank prompts. Attach survey instrument. Pause. Provide raw data N250. Pause. Stress test assumptions at 0.6x and 1.4x resources. Reconcile divergence. The system did not scold. It simply waited. She uploaded a new addendum words, still words. The grid blinked. CT external benchmark. Link or DOI required. The foghorn sounded again. The printer sighed. My keyboard clicked on keystrokes like quiet nails driven into structure. This was the fairness I wanted, not a shield for her. Not a trap against her. Just equal weight applied everywhere. I thought of my younger self patching that Civic app credited only as team. Back then, I ached for my name to be seen. Now I built frameworks where names mattered less than proof. That to me was justice, a system that didn't bend for familiarity, didn't tilt because a family didn't care whose shoulders the spotlight liked. On my desk, the teal scarf had slid halfway out of my bag fabric, spilling like a tide. I left it there, visible but quiet. Beside it, the verification grid pulsed live on my monitor, each rule waiting like a toll booth. Push a claim forward. Let the system pull at it. Proof remains or it collapses. That was all. No villain. No savior. Just wait and witness. Do you think strict verification where every claim must be proven is ultimately kinder than letting bias decide who advances? It was an ordinary Wednesday, the kind you almost forget while you're living it. The storm had finally pulled back, leaving the sky rinsed but not yet warm. Sunlight hit the harbor in sheets of silver, not gold, making the water look less like water and more like polished steel. The fund building carried its usual noises, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead elevators, groaning on their tracks, a janitor's cart squeaking somewhere down the hall. Nothing about the day looked like revelation, but revelations rarely announce themselves. They slip in through the footer. At 2:43 p.m., the stipend portal updated. I wasn't there to see it in real time. I didn't need to be. The system logged the action automatically, and Iris was the one waiting for it. She must have typed her password quickly. Breath shallow, expecting a screen filled with approval and reward. The numbers aligned themselves into tidy columns, balanced disbursement cycle date. Then at the bottom, the line appeared. Approved by N. Program Architect. Plain font. No bold. No color. Just 6 letters and a period black against white. The cursor blinked beneath it, steady and patient. Blink, blink, blink. I imagine her staring first with certainty, then with doubt. She would have read it once, twice, 3 times, waiting for it to change. But footers don't negotiate. They don't flatter or defend. They just sit there factual and final. Her breath must have fogged the glass. She must have leaned closer as if proximity could rewrite reality. But denial is fragile when receipts exist. For years, she had told herself I was clinging to names that weren't mine. Now the screen itself, her own stipend portal, said otherwise. My name was the one holding the ledger. My hand had approved the very funds she celebrated. Across the harbor, I was at my desk when the notification echoed through my console. The late light angled across the room, sharp enough to pick out dust in the air. On the chair beside me lay the teal scarf folded neatly, patient as an old truth waiting to be claimed. I picked it up, felt the weight of the fabric in my hands, and for the first time wrapped it around my neck. The fabric rasped softly against my skin, louder in meaning than in sound. Once that scarf had been a target for jokes too bright, too much. I had hidden it in pockets at the back of drawers as though silence could protect me from ridicule. But fabric doesn't forget. It waits. And when I tied it beneath my chin, it felt less like clothing and more like declaration. On the wall, my tide chart fluttered from the open window. The paper corners lifted in the breeze as if they wanted to fly away sails in miniature. I thought about the cycles it mapped: rise, fall, return. Proof that nothing stays erased forever. In my head, the piano motif that had threaded itself through all these quiet battles resolved into a chord at last. No more suspended notes. Just clarity. Then from the harbor came a single bell, struck clean its tone, carrying farther than applause ever could. The truth had spoken not in speeches or arguments, but in a footer. Quiet text at the bottom of a form. That's the way it often arrives, not as thunder, but as proof too plain to deny. I didn't know how Iris received it. Did she close the screen quickly? Heart-pounding cheeks burning with shame. Did she laugh and tell herself it was a coincidence, a clerical fluke? Or did she sit in silence, feeling the crack in her story widen with every blink of the cursor? People react differently when receipts replace narratives. Some harden, some collapse. Some begin again. I only knew this: the old script, the one where I was invisible, had ended. The footer had spoken. My name had stepped out of the shadows and into her sightline, not loud, not dramatic, just there, etched in the system she trusted. The scarf rested warm against my collarbone. The bell's echo drifted through the window. For the first time, I felt less like someone surviving erasure, and more like someone inevitable. Do receipts change hearts? The invitation came as a short message. One line without punctuation: meet me on the roof after hours. No greeting, no explanation. I knew it was Iris before I opened it fully. The words had her signature tension, the tone of someone who wanted a confrontation but didn't want to admit they were asking for it. I went anyway. Not for resolution, I didn't expect that, but because sometimes you step into weather simply to see which way it blows. The rooftop was colder than I imagined. Wind scraped along the concrete, pulled at my coat, threaded itself through the teal scarf I had finally decided to wear in daylight. I wrapped it tighter as I pushed open the heavy door, the clang echoing behind me. Steel rails lined the edge, damp with condensation. When I laid a hand on one, it stung the metal, biting into my palm until my skin reddened. Beyond the rail stretched the city, a jagged skyline of glass towers lit in fractured patterns, lights blinking like signals in an undeciphered code. Far below, the streets hissed with the rush of traffic, the sound rising faint but constant like air escaping through a crack. From above, gulls cut wide circles, their cries thin and sharp against the wind. Iris stood at the edge, coat flaring with each gust. She looked different here. Smaller, though not weaker. The stage-light energy she carried into rooms was gone. The skyline behind her refused to bend or shrink, and against it, her figure seemed stripped of performance. She didn't turn at first. Her shoulders stiffened when she sensed me approach, but she kept her gaze on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked at the edges as if the words had been waiting too long in her throat. You let me make a fool of myself. The wind shoved her words into me, cold and stinging. I watched her jaw tighten her hands, gripping the rail so hard her knuckles blanched. I let a moment pass. The city's hum filled the gap. I thought of all the times I had swallowed answers, all the years when I let silence protect me instead of truth. This time, silence felt earned, deliberate. I breathed once, the scarf tugging at my neck in the gust, and finally let my voice join the air. I let the work speak, I said, measured and steady, because words never did. She flinched almost imperceptibly, not as though struck, but as though the steel beneath her hands had shifted and she was forced to recalibrate her grip. For a while, neither of us spoke. She turned back to the skyline, staring at the towers, the rivers of headlights, the cranes lit up like skeletal spires. I studied her profile, searching for signs of collapse or fury. Instead, I saw only exhaustion, the quiet kind that comes when a script you've memorized no longer fits the scene unfolding around you. The gulls swooped closer, one passing low enough that its wing beat stirred my hair. Strands stuck across my mouth, and I left them there. Some moments don't ask to be tidy. The longer we stood there, the more I felt the rooftop itself become an instrument registering pressure like a barometer. Every gust of wind was another reading, every silence a measurement. We weren't battling for dominance anymore. We were simply registering each other's weather. Eventually, Iris pushed back from the rail. Her boots grated against the gravel, her coat snapping once more in the wind. She didn't look at me directly, but her mouth opened as if to shape a reply. Then it closed. She turned toward the door. No apology, no defense, no grand exit line. I didn't follow her. I didn't stop her. Some partings require no choreography. They are clean because they are quiet. When the door clanged shut behind her, the rooftop fell into a sharper silence, broken only by the hiss of the city below and the gulls overhead. I stood alone, scarf tugging in the wind fingers still pressed against the rail. The cold had bitten deeper. My skin numb now, but I didn't move. The music in my head thinned until it was only the faintest piano notes stretched so far apart they almost disappeared. Then even those dissolved, leaving silence not hollow, but steady like a held breath finally released. I tilted my head back to the skyline one last time. Glass towers glittered, but meant nothing compared to the sheer scale of what surrounded them. The harbor, the tide, the unmeasured horizon. That was the measure I had chosen, not the applause of a room or the sting of my sister's words. The real work existed on that scale, too vast to be claimed, too steady to be erased. I left the roof without haste, steps echoing softly against the concrete. The scarf stayed tight around my neck, not hidden, not apologetic. For the first time, I felt its color belonged to the skyline, not in defiance of it, but in rhythm with it. The chime arrived just after noon. A soft note, almost delicate, not the kind of sound that announces upheaval. The fun's mail system was designed to be polite, to whisper rather than shout. Still, when I heard it, I knew what it carried. Some messages change air pressure before they're even opened. I rolled my chair closer to the desk wheels, sighing across the floor, and tapped the key to open the memo. The screen glowed in the dimness of the office, neutral blue light filling the corners. There it was. Not dramatic, not sharp. Just a page of text written with the studied flatness of bureaucratic language. Leadership roles rebalanced to maximize efficiency. Cohort assignments corrected for optimal collaboration. Iris's name appeared once shifted from one column to another. No arrows, no bold font, no italics to mark it as extraordinary. On the surface, it looked like any other adjustment. Quiet as rain. But underneath, I felt the ground move. The signals had been stacking for weeks. They came not as explosions, but as tremors. A fellow's shoulders tensing when Iris entered the room. Side comments in the feedback portal noting skipped steps, Eli's meticulous logs catching breaches disguised as shortcuts. Culture speaks in whispers long before it shouts. And I had been listening. I picked up my pen, clicked the cap on and off, the sound echoing softly. A nervous habit, but also a ritual. Then I began to document. Line by line, I traced the signals, the Slack post that prized slogans over process. The protocols brushed aside the bluff at the interview that rang hollow under scrutiny. I didn't write with heat. My notes carried no exclamation points, no underlined fury. They were factual, measured, restrained. Not a sword, but a scalpel. That was the role I had chosen to protect the culture, not my pride. A system survives not through drama, but through record. If pride guided the memo, it would flare and fade. But procedure endures. I thought of Iris reading it. The same soft chime on her device, the same pale blue screen. I could see her opening it quickly, expecting confirmation of her place, and then freezing when her eyes found her name in a new column. She would search between the lines for malice, for fingerprints, for a voice behind the text. But she wouldn't find one. The memo was indifferent, impersonal. It cut without flourish. And that perhaps was the sharpest cut of all. I leaned back in my chair, scarf brushing against my neck, and felt the stillness settle. For once, I wasn't bracing against shame or ridicule. I wasn't hiding behind anyone's words. This decision had not been mine alone. It had been carried by signals, confirmed by structure, delivered by process. But I was part of it. My notes, my vigilance, my silence had weight. The music in my head was tight, restrained percussion. Sticks against muted drums, a rhythm held in check. No fanfare, no crescendo, just pulse and control. That was how procedure sounded, unemotional on the surface, but full of hidden consequence. I clicked the pen cap again, one last small percussion note, then saved the file and attached it to the record. The cursor blinked, waiting for my confirmation. I pressed enter. The memo sealed itself into the system, immutable, part of the archive. For years, I thought justice had to be loud, that fairness needed speeches or confrontations, some cinematic clash of voices. But here in the hush of an office with its soft chimes and clicking pens, I felt the opposite. Justice was quiet, deliberate, measured. It did not swing wildly. It cut precisely, leaving behind a structure stronger than before. I didn't smile. I didn't ache. I simply breathed steady and deep, knowing the funds culture would survive another day because procedure had done its work. Iris didn't know why her badge worked. I saw it in the hesitation of her hand, the way she tapped the plastic against the scanner, half expecting it to buzz red to deny her entry, as it had so many times before. But the light flashed green. The lock clicked open with a hollow clunk that seemed to echo too loudly in the corridor. She glanced at me. Suspicion, confusion, a little flicker of fear. But I didn't explain. Some doors don't open with words. They open with silence. The core systems room exhaled light as we stepped inside. The fluorescent bulbs overhead hummed like bees trapped in glass, filling the room with a nervous static. The air was cool, dry, carrying the faint tang of ozone from the projector that whirred steadily in the corner. It smelled like dust and electricity, sterile, unadorned, untouched by vanity. Iris's shoes scuffed against the linoleum as she walked forward, the sound too sharp in the hush. The projector threw its light across the far wall, spilling quarter by quarter, year by year. A living archive stretched across time growth charts, rising and dipping cohort launches, resource allocations failures recorded in red, recoveries written in blue. It wasn't just a wall of data, it was a heartbeat rendered visible, a pulse that had carried the fund through storms and droughts alike. And then she saw them. The coded initials tucked at the margins, threaded through every milestone. Small, precise, relentless. NF08, NF08, NF08. Again and again, across the span of years, she thought I had been invisible. The initials marking a framework adjusted before dawn, a crisis stabilized before it spiraled, a protocol tested until it could hold the weight of others. Quiet work never announced, never applauded, just done. Her breath stuttered. It wasn't the kind of gasp people perform when they want to be noticed. It was sharper, involuntary, the kind of sound the body makes when denial cracks. She reached a hand toward the wall, fingers hovering the projector's glow, painting her skin pale. She didn't touch it. Perhaps she knew the initials would not dissolve beneath her hand. I watched her eyes move, darting line to line. Recognition, disbelief, shame, all fighting for space. I saw her shoulders sink as if the weight of the room itself pressed down on her. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was thinner than I'd ever heard it. Why not tell me? The fluorescent buzz filled the pause between us, a sound that suddenly felt like judgment. I let the silence stretch, let the question hang in the air, and then I answered with the only truth that had lived inside me for years. Would you have heard me then? She flinched not from volume, because my words were soft, but from accuracy. Her eyes flicked toward me at last, then back to the wall as if it were safer to face the proof than my gaze. She didn't answer. And in that silence was its own kind of confession. The projector hummed on, steady and merciless. The initials kept glowing, quarter after quarter, proof that no spotlight, no speech, no swagger could erase what had been built brick by brick, year by year. The wall was more than record. It was labor you cannot plagiarize. The music in my mind swelled. Not the tight percussion of procedure, not the muted toms of vigilance. Strings this time, full, warm, patient, rising into a sustained chord that filled the room like breath finally released. A chord that didn't seek climax, but permanence. Iris stood motionless, her shadow cast across the chart. She looked small, almost fragile, dwarfed by the scale of what she faced. For the first time, she wasn't fighting me, wasn't mocking me, wasn't filling the silence with words meant to wound. She was simply standing before the truth, unable to turn it into something else. And I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was steadiness, the quiet certainty that comes when the tide turns, not with noise, but with gravity. I had given her access, but the choice was hers. Loss had already brushed her the leadership reassignment, the fading spotlight. But proof was different. Proof didn't scold. Proof didn't argue. Proof simply existed, undeniable as a bell toll waiting to be received. Would she let it change her? Or would she retreat into bitterness? Call the initials coincidence, pretend the ledger didn't matter. I couldn't decide that for her. My task was only to open the door, to let her see the wall, and to leave her alone with the weight of it. The chord in my chest held sustained, unwavering. The projector hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The initials glowed on. I didn't give her power. I gave her a chair. Not the kind with cushions, not the kind placed at the head of a table. A folding chair, paint-chipped legs, squeaking seat that wobbled if you leaned too far to the left. A chair you had to carry yourself, unfold yourself, steady yourself. Nobody mistakes a folding chair for a throne. And maybe that was exactly what Iris needed. I remember sliding the folder across the table. Thin, almost unimpressive. It didn't carry the weight of a leadership title or the sheen of a special assignment. Just a small pilot project, a mentorship program stitched together from scraps of funding and modest expectations. The kind of thing no one writes about in glossy annual reports. She opened it, eyes scanning the bullet points. Metrics to be tracked. Surveys to distribute. Rides to coordinate for fellows staying late in the library. Community nights in a borrowed basement where the heat came from the copier running nonstop and the light bulbs buzzed faintly overhead. No glamour. No spotlight. Just work. Make it mean something, I said. My voice didn't waver, but I didn't lace it with challenge either. It wasn't a dare. It was an invitation. Her brow furrowed. She hesitated. For a second, I thought she might laugh, push it back. Say something sharp about being wasted on spreadsheets and ride schedules. But she didn't. She closed the folder, slowly pressed it against her chest, and nodded once. The first weeks were clumsy. I watched from the periphery, never intervening, letting the chair teach her what the throne never could. In those early meetings, she carried herself like a performer dropped into the wrong venue. The basement walls were lined with curling posters from old campaigns, their tape yellowed and peeling. The floor was concrete, echoing with every scrape of a folding chair. Coffee was served in mismatched mugs borrowed from 3 different offices. This was no stage, no rooftop skyline. At first, she tried the old ways. She raised her voice to fill the space, gestured with wide sweeps of her hands. But the fellows around her, tired, overworked, carrying their own quiet burdens, didn't respond to volume. They needed presence, not performance. And when her words floated past them, unanswered, something inside her cracked. The next week, she came back quieter. Not silent, but listening. She asked questions, small ones at first. What do you need? What's been hardest? She leaned forward instead of standing apart. I saw her write notes by hand, her pen catching on the rough paper, her shoulders bent in concentration. I began to notice her staying later. Once when I walked by, she was at the copier pulling warm pages into neat stacks, face smudged faintly with toner. Another time, she was crouched beside a fellow's chair laptop open between them, showing how to align data in a spreadsheet. She wasn't giving orders, she was learning alongside them. And one night, I saw her outside under the streetlights. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still glistened, puddles glowing orange in the glow of sodium lamps. A fellow stood beside her, clutching a backpack too heavy for his frame. Iris waited with him until his ride arrived. She didn't check her phone. She didn't hurry away. She stood there, coat pulled tight, shoulders damp, until the car pulled up and he climbed in safely. She raised a hand in farewell before turning into the night. No one applauded. No one even knew. But I saw. These weren't grand gestures. They were the kind of small braveries that pile up like pebbles until they become a shoreline. Amma noticed before most. She mentioned it during a review, her voice edged with surprise. She's different. Less noise, more listening. The word listening lingered in the air like a benediction. I didn't respond. Not then. Change doesn't need applause. It needs continuity. The soundscape of those weeks shifted in my memory. No longer the staccato percussion of confrontation, no longer the cello undercurrent of vigilance. The music was warmer now, soft piano chords, brushed snares, keeping a gentle rhythm like a heartbeat, no longer racing but steadying itself. The folding chair became its own symbol. Not glamorous, not permanent, but real. You had to choose it every time, choose to carry it into the room. Choose to unfold it. Choose to sit in it humbly. A throne is given, but a chair is earned. And Iris sat in that chair, again and again. Each time she returned, the chair steadied her more than the room ever had. It taught her that worth isn't measured in applause, but in repetition, in the willingness to stay when the work is dull, when no one is watching, when the only reward is the quiet knowledge that someone else's night went better because of you. I think about that moment often, the shift from thrones to chairs, from crowns to community. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't instant. But it was real. And it was hers to claim. Have you seen someone actually change? The Fun's 5-year dinner was nothing like the galas people imagine when they hear the word anniversary. No crystal chandeliers, no velvet stage curtains, no scripted keynotes. Just a borrowed hall dressed in mismatched tablecloths, floral prints colliding with checkered squares, some edges, frayed corners pinned down with tape. The kind of imperfection that makes things honest. Outside, a taco truck idled, spilling the scent of lime and cilantro into the night air. Nostalgia carried in that smell back to the early days when Mason and I used to eat standing up on the curb after 14-hour shifts, sleeves rolled, hot sauce dripping down our wrists. Tonight, the same paper plates bent in our hands and no one complained. Low jazz curled from a Bluetooth speaker perched precariously on a stack of supply boxes. The bass line hummed like conversation under conversation, while the night breeze slipped in through propped-open doors, rustling napkins and cooling the warm hum of bodies. We sat scattered chairs, borrowed from 3 different offices, their legs squeaking against the floor. Some people leaned in close voices, hushed with memory. Others laughed too loud, beer bottles clinking. No speeches, no stage, just presence. Halfway through, Mason stood with his glass. Not raised high, not commanding attention, just lifted enough. His voice carried, not because he forced it, but because the room hushed on instinct. To the minds behind the curtain, he said simply, "No names, no long recitations. Just acknowledgement that work happens where light doesn't reach." The applause was warm, unchoreographed like rain on a tin roof, scattered sincere. I stayed seated, scarf tucked close, letting the sound pass over me. Recognition doesn't always need a face. Later, when dessert plates clattered and the taco truck shut off its engine, people drifted toward the corner board propped near the exit. A simple thing, top contributors. It wasn't glossy. Names written in marker initials coded alongside quarters and milestones. In the bottom corner, faint but steady, NF08. Anonymous, consistent, unclaimed. Iris stood in front of it longer than most. Her eyes scanned the list, paused on the initials, and I saw something in her expression shift, not surprise anymore. Not denial. Something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. She didn't call me out. Didn't point. She just pressed her lips together, turned back toward the tables, and began stacking chairs. One by one, she folded them, their metal frames clanging softly. Not glamorous work. Not photographed. Just chairs stacked in the quiet after a celebration. I watched her move steadily, the rhythm of service replacing the need for spectacle. The lime scent still lingered in the air, mixing with cilantro and the fading sweetness of Tres Leches cake. Jazz thinned to a final song, saxophone soft as a sigh. The night breeze slipped across my cheek as I stepped outside, carrying with it the murmur of dishes being cleared, laughter trailing off into fatigue. On the board, the initials remained. Not large, not central. But there, quiet evidence no one could erase. The pencil scratched across the page, steady and sure. It wasn't a speech I was writing, not a manifesto. Just a framework, lines, headings, notes that would grow into something sturdier than rhetoric. At the top, I wrote the title, Framework for Empowering Unseen Contributors. The words felt less like invention and more like excavation, as if they'd always been waiting under the surface. Guidelines for crediting invisible labor, practices to prevent erasure before it begins, processes that could outlast me, outlast any single ego, systems bigger than applause, bigger than silence. Sunlight spilled across the desk, catching the rim of my mug. Steam lifted in slow curls, soft as breath. On the wall, the tide map shifted slightly in the breeze, from the cracked window edges, curled corners stubborn. Its cycles had always reminded me that no loss was permanent, no silence eternal. When the framework draft was done, I closed the notebook gently. I didn't need to announce it. The work itself would move where it needed to go. The following Sunday, we gathered again at Harbor and Hearth. Same seaside cafe, same clatter of mismatched mugs and cutlery, same salt air drifting through cracked windows. But the rhythm was different. Iris arrived on time. Not late, not loud. She set her bag down quietly, kissed our mother's cheek without performance and without being asked, poured coffee first for everyone else before filling her own. No grand apology, no speech, just a different posture, a different presence. Sometimes change doesn't arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives in how a hand moves in the order someone chooses to serve. I sat at the end of the table again, mug warm in my palms, scarf soft against my neck. And for once, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel the old tug of invisibility pulling at my chest. The truth settled in me with the weight of stones, steady and final. I never wanted her to lose. I never wanted to watch her stumble or shrink. All I ever wanted was to stop losing to silence, to stop having my work, my presence, my name folded into other people's shadows. The tide map at home would still flutter. The scarf would still rest on its hook. The mug would still steam each morning. Symbols, yes, but more than that, anchors. Reminders that identity doesn't need to shout to be known. The music in my mind, the piano that had followed me through this entire arc, came back one last time. 3 notes. Simple. Resolving. Enough. The room around me hummed with ordinary conversation, our uncle telling a story too long, our mother laughing, chairs scraping wood planks. No spotlight, no stage, just a family brunch, slightly altered, slightly truer. I breathed it in. Sun on glass. Quiet inside me. And for once, nothing needed to be proven. If this arc reflects yours, comment 1. If you see it differently, comment 0. And share where you're listening from. Your story might be waiting in the silence too. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey, because the next story might be yours.